Hey guys, tonight we walk onto an Earth that would feel familiar for about 3 seconds, and then wonderfully, quietly wrong. The ground is still rock and dust beneath you. The sky still opens overhead. The sun still lays its warm hand across the land, but almost everything else has shifted into a stranger arrangement. The world is broader in a way that feels hard to explain at first, as if the continents have been pushed together by some giant absent-minded librarian and filed into one oversized volume. The air feels warmer. The land seems more open. The silence has a different texture to it. Before you get cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy spending time here with me. And if you feel like it, post your location and local time in the comments, because there is something oddly comforting about knowing where in the world you are listening from while we wander through a much older one. Let the world slow down for a moment. Let the fan murmur softly nearby, and let's slip into tonight's journey together. You begin somewhere in the Triassic period, a little over 230 million years ago, near the time the first true dinosaurs were stepping into the story. They are here, but only just, and the planet around them matters as much as they do. If you picture their beginning as a dramatic trumpet blast, with thunder and giant footsteps and immediate fame, Earth would gently clear its throat and suggest a quieter opening. Dinosaurs arrived on a world already busy with its own moods, its own weather, its own old scars, which is rude, honestly, but also beautiful. The first feeling this Earth gives you is space. So much space. The continents you know have not yet drifted into their modern places. Instead, most of the land is joined together in one enormous supercontinent called Pangaea. It stretches so widely that coastlines can feel very far away, and the interior seems to go on almost forever. You can imagine standing there and sensing that the sea is not just over the next hill or a few hours beyond the trees. In many places it is far, far off, and that changes everything. A giant landmass like that makes weather behave differently. Moist ocean air cannot easily reach the deep interior, so huge regions are dry, with broad floodplains, seasonal rivers, and deserts that can feel endless under the light. Earth is not one single sandy wasteland, though. That image is too simple, a little too movie poster. There are forests here, wetlands too, and green places gathered along river systems and wetter margins. Still, the dryness is important. You feel it in the openness of the land, in the dusty color of the ground, in the way life often clusters where water lingers. The world is warm overall, warmer than the Earth you know. There are no great permanent ice sheets at the poles like those of much later ages. Sea levels are generally lower than in many other periods because so much water is not spread across shallow inland seas. The seasons in many places can be strong and dramatic, especially across such a vast continent. Long dry stretches may give way to powerful rains, and then the land greens up almost politely, as if it had been waiting for permission. Rivers swell, lakes return, ferns and other hardy plants spread where they can. Then the dry times come back and remind everyone who is in charge. If you breathe in this world, the air might feel a little different too. Oxygen levels during much of the Triassic were likely somewhat lower than today, though the details shift depending on where and when you look, because Earth enjoys making even the atmosphere slightly complicated. You probably would not stand there giving a formal review of the air quality, but your body might notice. The planet is familiar, yes, though it is familiar in the way an old house feels after the furniture has all been moved in the dark. And the colors would surprise you. When people imagine deep time, they often paint it in heavy gray, as if the past were automatically drained of color just because it happened long ago. But this Earth is full of rich tones. Iron-red sediments stain great stretches of land. Dusty orange plains lie under pale blue skies. Conifers rise in dark green stands. Ferns gather in softer greens near water. Volcanic rock cuts across the scene in black and rust. Dawn and evening would still perform their usual kindness with gold and shadow, because sunlight has always understood good lighting. The animals, though, are where your expectations begin to wobble in a pleasant way. You came here for dinosaurs, and that is fair, but if you looked around right away, you might not spot a giant one silhouetted on a ridge doing its best poster pose. Early dinosaurs were not yet the unquestioned stars. Many were small to medium-sized, lightly built, quick on their feet, almost modest by later dinosaur standards. Their age of colossal swagger had not arrived. That comes later. Keep that image nearby, because it matters soon. For the moment, the land belongs to a mixed cast of creatures. Some are relatives of crocodiles, though often standing taller and moving with surprising grace. Some are strange reptiles with body plans that feel like evolution testing ideas in a half-lit workshop. Early mammal relatives are around too, small and easily missed, living out their own quiet chapter beneath bigger dramas. If you listened at dusk, you would not hear the world announcing one winner. You would hear many lineages trying, adapting, enduring. That is part of what makes this moment so interesting. Earth is still recovering from the greatest mass extinction it had ever known, the catastrophe at the end of the Permian, which happened before this scene opens. Life has returned, but the recovery took a very long time. Whole ecosystems had to be rebuilt. Food webs had to steady themselves again. The planet had been through something almost unimaginably severe, and what you are seeing now is not the untouched beginning of a fresh world. It is a world that has suffered, settled, and begun again without making a performance out of it. So when the first dinosaurs appear, they do not step into a perfect garden prepared for their arrival. They enter a living Earth still reorganizing itself. The climate is restless. The continents are arranged in a way that creates extremes. Evolution is experimenting everywhere. Opportunity exists, but it does not come gift-wrapped. It comes as open space, pressure, change, and the quiet possibility that some small, adaptable creature may do very well here. And maybe that is the soft magic of this first view. Earth at the dawn of dinosaurs is not a finished masterpiece. It is a work in progress. The mountains are older in some places, rawer in others. Rivers wander across broad plains, sometimes calmly, sometimes with dramatic seasonal enthusiasm. The air carries heat. The land keeps long memories in its rocks. Overhead, the same moon hangs above the world, though it feels like it belongs to a different story. Beneath it, the first dinosaurs move through a planet that does not yet know what they will become. You know, of course, that is the tender little secret you carry as you walk here. You know these small early forms are the opening notes of something immense. You know the future holds giants, feathers, thunderous herds, sharp-eyed hunters, and eventually birds lifting from branches in ordinary morning light. But none of that has happened yet. Right here, Earth is still holding its breath in a calm, ancient way, as if the universe has no interest in rushing. So you stand for a moment in that old warmth, with one vast continent under the sky and life spread across it in cautious confidence. The world feels harsher than ours in some ways, emptier in others, yet deeply alive all the same. And the longer you stay, the less alien it seems. It begins to feel like home wearing a very old face. Soon, it becomes even more moving to notice what this planet has recently survived, and how long it took for life to learn its balance again. That old warmth begins to feel different once you realize it is sitting on top of a wound. The Earth you are walking through has not simply arranged itself this way by chance, as if the sky woke up one morning and chose a dusty, dramatic look for the aesthetic. This world still carries the aftereffects of the greatest mass extinction our planet has ever known, the event at the end of the Permian period, around 252 million years ago. Long before the first dinosaurs started making their quiet entrance, life on Earth had already been pushed to the edge in a crisis so deep that whole ways of living were erased. Not a few famous animals, not one unlucky coastline. Whole ecosystems, whole ancient habits of survival simply folded away. If you had visited Earth just after that catastrophe, the planet would have felt strangely emptied out, as if someone had taken a crowded symphony and left only a few instruments still trying to remember the tune. Life did survive, and that matters, but the abundance and variety had been cut back with frightening efficiency. Most marine species disappeared. On land, many major groups collapsed. Forests were badly disrupted. Food webs, those quiet webs of who eats what and who depends on whom, had to be rebuilt almost from scratch. The likely causes were not quick and neat. Earth rarely bothers with neat. Gigantic volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia poured out immense volumes of lava over very long stretches of time. These eruptions also released huge amounts of gases, including carbon dioxide. The atmosphere warmed. Oceans warmed too. Warmer water holds less oxygen, which is inconvenient if you are, say, almost everything living in it. Ocean chemistry shifted. In some places, the seas became more acidic. In others, they lost oxygen so badly that large regions turned hostile to complex life. The climate lurched. The carbon cycle, which usually works like a slow planetary budget system, became badly disturbed. It was a global emergency written in rock, water, air, and time. And the difficult thing, the part that makes this especially haunting, is that recovery was not quick. There was no magical rebound where Earth shook itself off and carried on looking photogenic by the following Tuesday. The damage lingered. For millions of years, ecosystems remained simpler than they had once been. Some environments were unstable. Some lineages that survived did very well for a while because there were fewer competitors around. Scientists sometimes call these disaster taxa, which sounds severe, but it really means certain hardy survivors were able to spread widely in a stressed world. One of the best known was Lystrosaurus, a sturdy beaked animal related to the deeper mammal lineage, though it was not a mammal itself. It lived before dinosaurs appeared and became remarkably common in the early Triassic. You can picture it as one of the creatures helping repopulate a damaged planet, not glamorous, not interested in anyone's prehistoric beauty standards, just determined to keep going. There is something deeply reassuring about that. After catastrophe, the survivors are often not elegant, they are practical. The land itself reflected this slow rebuilding. Forests did return, but not all at once, and not everywhere in the same way. In some places, landscapes may have stayed open and harsh for long intervals. River systems shifted across broad sediment plains. Soils were not always stable. Erosion could be intense. Rainfall patterns may have swung between extremes. When people imagine ancient Earth, they sometimes assume it must have been timeless and steady, but this was a restless planet trying to recover its balance. The word recovery can sound gentle, almost cozy, yet in geology it often means countless small corrections spread over ages so long they make human patience look adorable. The oceans were recovering too, though with great difficulty. Marine ecosystems had lost many reef builders and many complex communities. Reefs, when they returned, were not immediately the same rich structures as before. Some parts of the sea may have remained low in oxygen for a long time. That matters because oceans are not only habitats, they are major engines in the planet's climate and chemistry. When the sea struggles, the whole Earth feels it. Remember that quiet little detail, because it helps explain why the Triassic world still seems slightly unsettled even when life has returned. By the time dinosaurs first appeared in the late Triassic, Roughly 20 million years after that great dying, Earth had come a long way. It was far from lifeless. Ecosystems were more complex again. Plants had spread. Animals had diversified. Rivers, floodplains, forests, coastlines, and inland basins all hosted living communities with their own rhythms. But the long shadow of the extinction still shaped the world. Some older dominant groups were gone forever. Ecological space had opened. The stage, if you like, had been cleared in a terribly uneven way, leaving room for new actors to step into patterns of life that had not existed before. That is one reason the first dinosaurs matter, even when they are still small and not yet running the place. They appeared in a world of opportunity created partly by loss. Evolution is not sentimental. It does not pause for a respectful silence and then resume with a carefully organized plan. It works with what is left. It adapts. It explores. It tries strange little body designs and movement styles and feeding strategies, then keeps the ones that fit. On this recovering Earth, with climates in flux and ecological roles newly available, adaptable creatures had a chance. You can almost feel that if you walk across a Triassic floodplain at evening. The light goes softer. Heat rises off stone and mud in slow waves. Conifers stand beyond the riverbanks and lower plants crowd the wetter margins. Somewhere nearby, insects buzz with ancient confidence, already very good at being insects, which is honestly a bit unfair. Small reptiles slip through brush. Crocodile-line archosaurs patrol certain habitats with real authority. Mammal relatives continue their more private experiments in survival. And among them, still easy to overlook, are the early dinosaurs, not yet giants, not yet icons, just one more thread in a complicated recovering world. That makes their arrival feel more intimate. They do not burst onto a healthy, finished Earth like celebrities stepping from a limousine. They emerge from the long quiet after disaster, while the planet is still rebuilding texture and resilience. The air is warmer than modern air. The supercontinent still shapes extreme seasons. The biosphere is recovering its richness, but the memory of collapse lingers in who is present, who is absent, and who has room to grow. And there is something almost comforting in that slow return. Earth was hurt badly, life was reduced. The systems that make the planet feel full and stable were shaken. Yet over millions of years, rivers kept moving sediment, plants kept spreading where water allowed, animals kept breeding and wandering and adapting, and the world kept making space for complexity again. It did not heal in a straight line. It did not heal politely. Still, it healed. So when you look at the Earth of the first dinosaurs, you are not seeing the aftermath of a single dramatic moment. You are seeing a recovery already underway, a world that has spent ages learning how to breathe evenly again. The rocks remember the violence. The climate remembers it too. Life remembers in its missing branches and its new experiments. And beneath that broad Triassic sky, everything feels both fragile and persistent at once. That strange combination is part of the beauty here. The world is not naive. It has already survived something enormous, which means the silence around you is not emptiness. It is resilience. And once you feel that, the great shape of the land itself begins to matter even more, because this recovering life is spread across one vast joined continent under one immense sky. That resilience had to spread itself across a planet arranged in a very unusual way, because the Earth of the first dinosaurs was not broken into the familiar continents you carry around in your head today. There was no Atlantic Ocean dividing the Americas from Europe and Africa, no India sailing north toward Asia, no Antarctica isolated in its cold private circle. Most of the world's land had gathered into one immense supercontinent, Pangaea, a name that means all Earth, which is one of those rare scientific names that sounds exactly as dramatic as it deserves to. If you could rise quietly above the planet and look down from far enough away, Pangaea would appear as a giant connected body of land wrapped by a vast global ocean called Panthalassa. Off to one side there was also the Tethys Ocean, a broad tropical seaway that opened into the superocean and touched parts of Pangaea's margins. The basic shape was real, but the details were always a little messy, with bays, inland basins, coastal plains, and long edges that changed over time. Earth never does perfect geometry. It prefers grand outlines with interesting complications. From above, the thing that would strike you first is scale. Pangaea was enormous in a way that almost feels impolite. It stretched from high northern latitudes to far southern ones, crossing climate zones that today are separated by oceans and drifting continents. The interior of that landmass lay far from the sea, and that distance mattered every single day. Oceans soften climates. They send moisture inland, store heat, and smooth out extremes. When most of your land is bundled into one giant block, much of the interior loses that softening touch. It becomes more continental in the truest sense. Hotter in warm seasons, colder in cool ones, drier in many places, and more dramatic overall. You can feel that if you imagine yourself standing deep within Pangaea, nowhere near the coast. The sky feels larger because the land runs so far in every direction. Winds arrive having traveled long distances over dry ground. Rain can be unreliable. Rivers may still cut across the landscape, sometimes broad and slow, sometimes reduced to channels waiting for the next wet season to wake them up. Lakes appear and shrink. Floodplains widen under seasonal pulses of water. The rhythm of life becomes tied to waiting, enduring, and responding quickly when moisture returns. This is one reason the Triassic world could feel so open. In many parts of Pangaea, especially the interior, forests were not spread evenly in every direction like a continuous green blanket. There were green corridors, wetter margins, patches of woodland, river systems lined with life, and drier stretches in between. The land often had a broad, exposed quality, with sediment plains, conifer stands, fern-rich low areas, dunes in some regions, and long distances between one ecological mood and the next. It was not empty, though. It only looked that way from a modern mind used to smaller continents and easier coastlines. And because Pangaea was so large, weather systems could become extreme. Seasonal monsoons likely affected some regions, especially nearer the Tethys margins, where land and ocean heating created powerful shifts in atmospheric circulation. In simpler terms, the sky could spend part of the year withholding rain with stern prehistoric determination, and then later arrive with dramatic generosity. Sediment records from Triassic rocks suggest repeated wet and dry cycles in many places. Mud cracks, river deposits, lake beds, dune sands, all of them quietly record climates that swung more than you might expect. The land knew both thirst and flood. That matters for the first dinosaurs because they were shaped by movement across exactly this kind of world. Early dinosaurs were not yet giant specialists tied to narrow lifestyles. Many seem to have been lightly built, active, and adaptable, living in landscapes where water, vegetation, and prey were not always evenly distributed. On a giant supercontinent with strong seasonal contrasts, being able to travel efficiently would help. So would flexibility. So would being small enough to survive the quieter years. You can almost see how Earth was teaching them its rules before granting them a larger role. Pangaea also created something else that feels important once you notice it: connectedness. Because the land was joined, animals could spread across huge areas without needing to cross oceans the way later species often would. Over time, related groups could appear across wide stretches of the supercontinent, though not instantly and not without barriers. Deserts, mountain belts, climate zones, and river systems still divided habitats. But the broad continuity of land meant lineages had pathways open to them that would later be cut apart as continents drifted away. The world was a single stage, even if the scenery changed dramatically from one side to the other. That is one reason fossils of early dinosaurs and their close relatives show up in regions that are today very far apart. Places we now call South America, Africa, North America, Europe, and India once belonged to neighboring parts of a joined landmass. Rocks from those places preserve pieces of a shared world. A fossil found in Argentina and one found in Zimbabwe do not feel so distant when you remember that the ancient animals themselves were not living on separate modern continents. They were residents of the same great connected Earth. The coastlines of Pangaea would have had their own beauty too. Along the margins, moisture from the surrounding ocean could support richer plant growth. River deltas and lowlands fed into shallow marine environments. Storms rolled in from the sea. Tides moved in rhythms you would still recognize, though the geography behind them was very different. If you stood there at sunset, the scene might feel almost familiar for a moment, until you remembered that inland from those shores stretched one of the largest continuous land areas the planet has ever assembled. And under all of this, the crust itself was quietly preparing to change. Pangaea did not last forever. Even as the first dinosaurs appeared, the deep forces that would eventually split this supercontinent apart were beginning to gather. The breakup had not yet fully announced itself, but the arrangement of the land was temporary. That gives the whole world a slightly suspended feeling in hindsight. You are looking at a planet in a grand middle moment, joined together, climatically intense, and already carrying within it the seeds of separation. Still from the ground, what you mostly feel is scale, distance, exposure, a kind of patient magnificence. The sky arches over plains and forests and river valleys that seem to have no hurry in them. The winds travel far. The seasons matter. The inland dryness shapes where life gathers and how it survives. Small dinosaurs move through these spaces without any idea that later ages will treat them like royalty. Around them, the supercontinent holds everything together in one vast arrangement, stern and beautiful and strangely calm. And once you have that image of one continent under one sky, the climate itself begins to feel even more vivid, because this Earth was not only joined together. It was warm, dusty, and full of strong seasonal moods that touched nearly every living thing. That warmth was not a background detail. It was one of the main characters. If you stayed on this Earth long enough to stop noticing the unfamiliar coastlines and the strange animal silhouettes, the climate would slowly take over your attention. The Triassic world, especially near the time the first dinosaurs appeared, was generally warmer than the modern Earth you know. There were no great permanent ice sheets at the poles, no vast white caps storing cold in the background and quietly moderating the planet's moods. The whole system ran hotter. Not in the theatrical sense people sometimes imagine, with every horizon shimmering like an oven and every creature trudging through endless misery, but in a broad planetary sense. Warm oceans, warm air, warm seasons, and a lot of land sitting far from the sea, where heat had room to build. That combination matters. A warm planet feels one way near an ocean and another way deep inside a supercontinent. Near coasts, moisture can soften things. Breezes carry the sea's slow memory. Temperatures still rise, of course, but water has a calming influence, almost like a sensible friend in a room full of dramatic people. Deep inland, Pangaea had less of that moderation. Summers in many places could become intensely hot. Winters, depending on location, could still be cool enough to remind the land that warmth is not the same as gentleness. So the climate was not just warm. It was often strongly seasonal and, in many regions, sharply dry for long stretches. You can imagine standing on a Triassic plain in the later part of the dry season. The sky is broad and hard-edged. The ground underfoot is packed, cracked, or powdered into fine dust depending on the local sediments. River channels that once moved a great deal of water may have shrunk, leaving behind isolated pools, damp margins, or ribbons of life clinging close to moisture. Plants endure rather than celebrate. Animals move with purpose. The whole landscape feels as though it has learned patience the long way. Then the rains come back. In some regions, especially those influenced by seasonal wind patterns, rainfall may have arrived in powerful pulses. Something like monsoon behavior likely affected parts of Triassic Pangaea, with shifting pressure systems and strong contrasts between wet and dry parts of the year. So the same land that looked sparse and severe under one sky could become suddenly, almost surprisingly alive under another. Rivers would swell, floodplains would spread, lake levels could rise, and plants adapted to these rhythms would respond quickly. It is a beautiful thing to picture, this old Earth moving between restraint and abundance, as if the climate itself were breathing in very long, slow cycles. The rocks remember these swings. Triassic sediments often show signs of repeated drying and wetting. Mud cracks appear in ancient lake beds and floodplain deposits, then layers of river sediment settle over them later. Sandstone records wandering dunes in some regions. Other layers preserve channels, ponds, and wetter lowlands. It is one of the quieter pleasures of geology that stone can keep such intimate weather notes for hundreds of millions of years without ever seeming proud of itself. The atmosphere likely held more carbon dioxide than today, which helped support the warmer global climate. The exact amount varied across the long Triassic, and scientists still refine the details, because ancient air prefers to leave clues rather than tidy labels. Still, the general picture is clear enough. Greenhouse conditions were stronger. Heat was easier to maintain. The world did not need ice to remind it of winter in order to have seasonal contrast. Land arrangement and atmospheric composition were already doing plenty of work. And the light on a warm, dry world feels different too. You can almost see it. Morning arrives over red sediments and pale stone with a kind of clean brightness. By midday, heat presses more firmly on the ground and distant surfaces begin to tremble slightly in the air. Dust hangs in stillness after a breeze passes. Evening softens everything again. Long shadows stretch across braided riverbeds, conifer stands, fern patches, and open ground where small animals have crossed since dawn. There is a cinematic quality to it, but a quiet one with none of the modern world's constant motion. No engines, no glass, no wires, only wind, water when it comes, and the patient heat of a planet arranged very differently from your own. Even the nights might feel subtly unusual. A warm world radiates its stored heat back into the darkness. Stone cools slowly. Dust settles. Insects carry on with the confidence of creatures that solved their basic body plan a very long time ago. Somewhere beyond the edge of sight, reptiles and early dinosaur relatives move through the dimness, following scent, water, prey, or simple instinct. The climate shapes all of it. It decides where plants are thickest, where rivers persist, where herds or hunters can travel, where eggs might survive, where small bodies can avoid overheating, where larger ones can make efficient use of land and time. For the first dinosaurs, this climate was not merely scenery. It was a training ground. Early dinosaurs appear to have been active animals, many of them upright in posture and fairly efficient movers. In a world of scattered resources, seasonal stress, and broad open spaces, those qualities could become useful. The warm conditions and shifting wet-dry cycles did not automatically hand them success, but they rewarded flexibility. If a lineage could move well, feed opportunistically, and cope with changing landscapes, it had options. And on ancient Earth, options are precious. There were probably fires too, because warm seasonal climates, plant matter, and lightning are old companions. But even that fits the rhythm rather than breaking it. Fire clears, plants return, sediments settle, rivers shift, life adjusts. The Triassic world was dynamic, not chaotic. That difference matters. Chaos feels sharp and nervous. Dynamism can still feel calm when it unfolds over deep time. Mountains weather grain by grain. Climates swing over thousands or millions of years. Species spread, retreat, and spread again. Nothing hurries, even when change is immense. And perhaps that is why this climate feels so memorable once you spend a little time with it. It is not the climate of comfort in the modern human sense. It offers no easy coast-to-coast moderation, no cool forest everywhere, no soft blanket of stable weather wrapping the land. Yet it has a severe beauty of its own. Heat glowing above stone, rain returning after absence, long seasons carving habits into rivers and roots and bones. A world dry enough to feel open, warm enough to feel ancient, and alive enough to keep surprising you. Soon your eyes adjust to the life growing through all of this, because for all the dust and heat, the Triassic Earth was still green in its own unfamiliar way. The plants wading along riverbanks, across uplands, and through wetter margins begin to step out of the background, and once they do, the whole world changes again. Soon your eyes stop reading the land as only heat and dust, because the green world begins to step forward. At first it can seem sparse, especially after the broad open plains and dry seasons you have been carrying with you. Then, slowly, the details gather. Dark stands of conifers rise beyond a river channel. Dense fern growth thickens the wetter ground. Horsetails cluster in low places where water lingers, their vertical stems catching the light with a quiet kind of confidence, as if they have been doing this forever, which, in fairness, they almost have. The Triassic Earth is not a flower-filled world in the modern sense. There are no meadows scattered with blossoms, no grasses rolling away in soft green waves, no orchards, no fields of wildflowers pretending they invented beauty. The plant world is older in style, older in mood, and somehow more solemn because of it. Most of the land plants shaping this age belong to groups that reproduce with spores or seeds, but not flowers. Flowering plants, the angiosperms that dominate so much of the modern landscape, had not yet become part of the picture. That absence changes the feel of everything. Without flowers and grasses, the world looks less delicate and less familiar. It leans more toward texture than color, more toward form than decoration. Cones, fronds, stiff leaves, woody trunks, scale-like foliage, fan-like crowns. You are looking at a greener earth, but not a softer one. Conifers were among the major rulers of this plant world. In many Triassic landscapes, they formed the tall framework of forests and woodlands, especially where conditions allowed trees to establish themselves well. Some were relatives of lineages that still exist today, though their exact forms were often different enough to make you pause. You could stand beneath them and recognize the basic logic of a conifer forest, the upward reach, the woody strength, the pollen and seed cones, the evergreen persistence, and still feel that you were in a much older version of that idea. Their silhouettes may have resembled Araucarian trees in some regions, with strong trunks and branching shapes that feel both orderly and ancient. That matters because conifers were well suited to a world like this. Seeds gave them an advantage in drier settings compared with many older spore-dispersing plants. They did not depend on freestanding water for fertilization in the same way more ancient plant groups often had. Their structure helped them colonize uplands and seasonally dry environments that would have been more difficult for softer, wetter-loving vegetation to dominate. on a warm supercontinent with long dry intervals. That is a useful skill to bring to the table. Still, the green world was not only conifers. Cycads and cycad-like plants added another distinctive note to Triassic scenery. These were not palms, even though at a glance some might tempt a sleepy modern brain into making that mistake. They often had stout trunks and crowns of stiff leaves, giving some landscapes a strange, almost tropical appearance, though the ecosystems themselves were their own ancient thing. Their presence lends the Triassic a very particular visual mood, one that feels lush in places but also architectural, as if the plants were built from patience and sunlight rather than softness. Some of the cycad-like plants of the Mesozoic belong to extinct groups more diverse than the survivors you know today, and their leaves could spread through warm habitats in striking abundance. There were also ginkgo relatives and seed ferns in parts of the Triassic world, reminders that plant evolution was not moving in a straight line toward the landscapes you know. It was branching, experimenting, retaining older forms while opening room for newer ones. Seed ferns are especially lovely in that quiet prehistoric way because the name itself sounds like a contradiction. They carried seed-based reproduction, yet some had foliage that looked fern-like. Ancient Earth never felt obliged to sort itself into categories that would be convenient for future textbooks. And then there were the true ferns which loved the wetter places. Along stream banks, in floodplains, near lakes, and in areas refreshed by seasonal rain, they could gather in broad, soft masses. After the harder outlines of conifers and cycads, fern growth brings a more forgiving texture to the land. Fronds overlap, shade deepens, moisture stays longer in the soil. If the dry season has passed and water has returned, fern-rich ground would feel almost luxuriant, a green exhale from a planet that spends much of its time holding itself together under heat. Horsetails, too, were part of that wetter margin world. Their ancestors reach back deep into the Paleozoic, and by the Triassic they still occupied damp ground with an old, practical grace. You can picture them along water edges, rising in clumps, their jointed stems repeating a simple design that had proven itself over immense stretches of time. They are one of those plants that make the ancient world feel continuous. So much around you has changed, yet a horsetail still looks like it knows exactly what it is. What is missing is just as important as what is present. No grass underfoot, no flowering shrubs, no fruit hanging from branches in the familiar modern way, no fields built from the plant lineages that would later feed grazing mammals, including the very dramatic human habit of turning seeds into breakfast. This means the colors of the landscape come less from petals and more from leaf surfaces, bark, spores, cones, and the tones of stone and sediment around them. The beauty is there, absolutely, but it is quieter, more structural, more patient. The way these plants reproduced also shaped the atmosphere of the world. Winds carried pollen across the land. Spores drifted from fern-rich growth in the right conditions. Water helped some plant communities spread and return after seasonal change. Forests shed needles, fronds, scales, cones, and woody debris into rivers, where some of it would be buried, preserved, mineralized, and eventually turned to stone. That is how entire Triassic forests can reach toward you today through petrified wood and fossil leaves. The trees are gone, the landscape rearranged, the continent split apart, and still the grain of ancient trunks remains, almost politely refusing to vanish. And if you walked through one of those greener Triassic corridors after rain, the whole age might feel unexpectedly tender. The dust would darken, water would gather in shallow channels, ferns would lift, conifers would stand with deep stillness overhead, cycad-like leaves would hold beads of moisture, insects would move through the undergrowth, already very committed to their careers. The air would smell of wet soil, resin, plant matter and warmth. It would not be a modern forest smell, but it would be close enough to touch something familiar in you. That familiarity matters because it reminds you that the earth of the first dinosaurs was not only harshness and open ground. It was also shelter, shade, seasonal renewal, places to feed, hide, nest, and grow. The plants made the world habitable in the most literal sense. They captured sunlight, built tissues, stabilized sediments, fed herbivores, reshaped moisture, and filled the air with the slow green work that all complex land life depends on. Dinosaurs were arriving, yes, but they were arriving into a botanical world already deep with history. And once you notice that, the next shift comes naturally, because these forests, floodplains, and fern-rich margins were not waiting empty for dinosaurs to claim them. Other creatures were already moving through this green world with confidence, and many of them were stranger than the legends that came later. The green world around you was already busy before dinosaurs became anything like household names, which is a funny phrase to use for animals that would have been very bad at managing a household. If you walked through a late Triassic landscape expecting every shadow to belong to a dinosaur, the planet would gently correct you. Dinosaurs were there, yes, but they were sharing the land with a remarkable cast of other animals, many of them successful, widespread, and perfectly capable of acting as though this age belonged to them. In a very real sense, for a while, it did. A great deal of that world was shaped by archosaurs, the broader group that includes both the crocodile line and the bird line, with dinosaurs belonging to the latter. During the Triassic, the crocodile side of the family was especially inventive. It produced phytosaurs, etosaurs, roysuchians, ornithocechids, and early croc relatives, each finding a different way to move through the same warm world. Some were low and armored. Some were tall and predatory. Some lived close to water. Some strode across open land. It was less like one neat kingdom, and more like evolution trying on several excellent coats at once. Near rivers and lakes, one of the strangest sights would have been the phytosaurs. At a glance, they might remind you of crocodiles, with long jaws and a semi-aquatic life, but they were not true crocodiles. They were part of that broader crocodile line archosaur story, running their own successful experiment. Imagine a still river under evening light, reeds and fern growth along the margins, insects tracing the air above the water, and just beneath the surface, one of these long-snouted hunters waiting with patient prehistoric professionalism. The scene would feel oddly familiar, and then one detail would make it deliciously wrong. The nostrils of phytosaurs sat high on the head, close to the eyes rather than near the tip of the snout. Earth was already playing with shapes that looked modern from afar, and wonderfully ancient up close. Away from the water, the land could belong to etosaurs, broad-bodied herbivores wrapped in heavy armor. They were crocodile-line archosaurs too, but their lives were very different from the stealthy patience of phytosaurs. Etosaurs were built for a more grounded existence, often low-slung and well-defended, with bodies plated in bony armor that gave them a slightly over-prepared appearance, which is never a bad strategy if the local predators are ambitious. Their heads were relatively small, and many species seem to have fed on plants or rooted around in the soil. You can picture them moving through floodplain edges or drier vegetated ground, leaving tracks in damp sediment after seasonal rain, sturdy and unhurried, like little armored tanks designed by someone who thought elegance was overrated. Then there were the roysuchians and other large predatory relatives on the crocodile side of the family, animals that could dominate the landscape in a way the earliest dinosaurs usually did not yet manage. Some roysuchian-type predators were large, powerful, and upright in posture, with limbs positioned more beneath the body than the sprawled stance people often imagined for ancient reptiles. In several Triassic ecosystems, these crocodile-line hunters were among the top land predators. So when you look across a broad plain at dusk and feel that old, instinctive little shiver that comes from knowing something big may be out there, the most likely owner of that moment is not always a dinosaur. Sometimes it is one of these formidable archosaurs, carrying itself with exactly the sort of confidence you would expect from an animal at the top of the food web. And beyond the archosaurs, other lineages still held important places in this world. Mammal relatives, especially cynodonts, were part of the Triassic story in ways that feel easy to miss if your mind is full of future giants. These were not mammals yet in the modern sense, but they were on that deeper branch leading in your direction. Some were small and probably lived fairly private lives, feeding on insects or other modest meals, moving through undergrowth, burrows, or sheltered places where larger reptiles paid less attention. Others earlier in the Triassic had been more prominent. By the late Triassic, cynodonts remained a significant part of some ecosystems, a reminder that the old synapsid story had not ended just because the age of reptiles was gathering strength. It was still continuing quietly beside it. In some famous late Triassic environments, especially in what is now Argentina, the balance of life becomes especially clear. The Ischigualasto ecosystem, one of the key places for understanding the first dinosaurs, appears to have been dominated not by dinosaurs but by rhynchosaurs and cynodonts. Rhynchosaurs were chunky beaked reptiles, often herbivorous, with broad skulls adapted for feeding on tough plant material. They do not get the same glamorous treatment in popular imagination, which is rude, because they were doing very solid Triassic work. Early dinosaurs in those landscapes were part of the community, but they were not yet the obvious rulers of it. They were living among established herbivores, mammal relatives, and powerful archosaur competitors, learning the planet the hard way. That is what makes this world feel so rich. Nothing about it is simple. The first dinosaurs are present, but they are not marching through an empty world with a banner announcing destiny. They are entering a crowded and competitive Earth where many body plans still seem equally plausible. Some animals carry armor, some slip into water, some stalk on long legs, some crop tough vegetation, some keep to the margins and survive through caution rather than scale. The future has not yet chosen a single winner. It is still sorting through possibilities with calm, ancient patience. And perhaps that is the most beautiful part of this moment. You get to see dinosaurs before fame found them. Around them, the world is full of other experiments, many of them elegant in their own severe way, many of them successful for millions of years. They are not side characters in someone else's myth. They are the living fabric of Triassic Earth. The rivers belong to more than one hunter. The fern margins hide more than one kind of small survivor. The open plains echo with feet that do not all belong to the future. Keep that image nearby, because very soon, out of this crowded, complicated, quietly magnificent world, the first true dinosaurs begin to step a little more clearly into view. Out of that crowded world, the first true dinosaurs begin to come into focus, and the strange, lovely thing is how modest they seem at first. You already know what the name asterisk dinosaur will eventually carry. It will grow heavy with giant skeletons, museum halls, thunderous footsteps, long necks, horns, plates, feathers, films, childhood obsessions, and the deeply committed opinions of 5-year-olds everywhere. But here, near the beginning, the word does not yet feel enormous. It feels light on its feet. The earliest dinosaurs were not the towering icons of later ages. Many were small or medium-sized animals, lean rather than bulky, quick rather than colossal, living among many other successful creatures without yet looking like the obvious stars of Earth. That is one of the most charming truths in this story. Great dynasties often begin in very ordinary proportions. The The first dinosaurs appear in the late Triassic, probably somewhere around 233 million years ago, though the details are still refined as new fossils are studied, and old rocks give up their secrets with their usual prehistoric reluctance. Much of the best early evidence comes from the southern part of Pangaea, especially regions that are now South America. In places like what is now Argentina and Brazil, ancient sediments have preserved some of the earliest known dinosaurs and their close relatives, letting you peer into that moment when one branch of archosaurs began to develop a style that would later reshape the land. If you walked through one of those landscapes, you would not see a bright line painted on the ground saying dinosaurs start here. Evolution is far too elegant and frankly too mischievous for that. What you would see instead are animals closely related to one another, sharing traits, diverging slowly, each generation shifting the balance a little. Dinosaurs emerged from within a broader group of reptiles called archosaurs, and more specifically among the dinosaur line branch, close to other early forms that were almost dinosaurs or near neighbors to them. The boundary is real, but in life it would have looked subtle. Bones carry the clues. Joints, sockets, limb posture, skull details, hand structure, pelvis shape. Quiet anatomical decisions made over time and then locked into stone. One of the important changes involved the way the limbs were arranged beneath the body. Earlier reptiles often had a more sprawling posture, with limbs extending somewhat out to the sides. Dinosaurs, like some other archosaurs, carried their limbs more directly under them. That sounds technical, and it is, but it also changes the whole feeling of an animal. An upright posture can support more efficient movement. It allows longer strides, steadier walking and running, and a more direct relationship between body and ground. You can almost see the difference in silhouette alone. Early dinosaurs were built in a way that suggested motion mattered. And motion did matter. Many of the earliest dinosaurs seem to have been active, fairly agile animals. Some were carnivorous, some herbivorous, and some perhaps more flexible in diet than the later grand categories make it seem. They lived in seasonal environments where food and water were not always spread politely across the land, and being able to move efficiently through those landscapes would have been useful. They were not yet giant specialists. They were adaptable creatures in a changing world. Think of animals like Aeoraptor *, Herosaurus *, and Saturnalia *, names that sound almost theatrical until you imagine the actual creatures moving through Triassic scrub and floodplains with no interest at all in becoming symbols. Aeoraptor was relatively small, lightly built, and probably omnivorous or carnivorous. Herosaurus was larger, a predator with a long tail and powerful hind limbs, one of those early forms that still sits near the base of the dinosaur story in a way that keeps paleontologists politely busy. Saturnalia * from Brazil was a more delicate early sauropodomorph, part of the lineage that would one day give rise to the long-necked giants, though at this stage, nothing about it would make you predict mountains with legs. The future is tucked inside these bodies, but very quietly. And that is worth lingering over. When the first dinosaurs appeared, they did not arrive already divided into the grand familiar groups in their later perfected forms. The early branches were there, yes, the meat-eating line that would lead toward theropods, and the line that would lead toward sauropodomorphs, and later the ornithischians would rise as another major branch, though their early history is still somewhat murkier in the fossil record. But at this beginning, the distinctions are not yet expressed in maximum grandeur. The great plant-eating giants are still small. The later fearsome predators are still learning what their lineage can become. It is like seeing the first sketches of a masterpiece before the canvas fills. You might notice something else too. Early dinosaurs often had long hind limbs, lighter bodies, balancing tails and grasping hands, depending on the species. There is a sense of athletic possibility in them. Not all of them were built the same way, of course, and the early family tree is not always simple, but many of these first forms give the impression of alertness. They look ready to travel, ready to chase, ready to exploit opportunities in a world that is still ecologically unsettled from older extinctions and still dominated in many places by other powerful reptiles. That last detail matters. Dinosaurs were not instantly dominant. For millions of years after they appeared, they seem to have been only one part of the wider Triassic community. In some environments they were rare. In others they were present but not overwhelmingly abundant. Crocodile-line archosaurs still held major roles, especially among large predators. Other herbivores, like rhynchosaurs, could be more common than dinosaurs in some ecosystems. So the earliest dinosaurs were successful, but not yet supreme. There is something almost endearing about that. Before they became the rulers of the Mesozoic, they had to begin as promising newcomers. And perhaps that is why the first dinosaurs feel so vivid when you imagine them properly. They are not heavy with destiny. They are alive in the present tense. A small predator steps lightly across drying mud beside a receding watercourse. A slender early sauropodomorph moves through patchy vegetation, feeding where the season has left enough green to bother with. A storm has passed. Ferns have lifted. Insects hum in the warm air. Somewhere in the distance, one of the larger crocodile-line predators still commands more attention than these newcomers. But the dinosaurs are there, moving through the same world with a certain efficiency, a certain resilience, a certain style of body that will matter more and more. You can feel Earth testing them. Heat, drought, flood, distance, competition, opportunity. The planet is not pampering them, which is probably for the best. It is giving them a hard, useful education, and quietly, without ceremony, they fit. That may be the most important part of their beginning. Dinosaurs did not succeed because the world was waiting for them like a stage crew standing nervously in the wings. They succeeded because in this warm, seasonal, recovering, competitive Earth, some of their traits happened to work very well. Efficient posture, active movement, flexible early lifestyles, the ability to persist while the planet kept rearranging itself. Later, after more extinctions and more change, those advantages would matter even more. But even here, in these first small steps, you can already sense the alignment between creature and world. Still, if you lift your eyes for a moment from their tracks and bones and body plans, something even calmer begins to gather above them. Because all of this happened under a sky that was both familiar and impossibly old, with the moon already watching, the stars already turning overhead, and the nights of Triassic Earth carrying their own quiet kind of grandeur. Above all of this, above the fern plains and conifer stands and river channels drying at the edges, above the small early dinosaurs and the larger predators that still overshadow them, the sky waits with its own slow kind of patience. It is the same sky in the deepest sense, the same moon, the same sun, the same Milky Way spread across darkness. And yet, if you stood there on a warm Triassic night and looked up long enough, you would begin to feel how different familiarity can be when time has had a few 100 million years to rearrange the furniture. The moon would be one of the strangest comforts. It was already there, already governing tides, already pulling gently on Earth's oceans and on Earth itself, just as it does now. But it would have been a little closer than the moon you know tonight, because over deep time the moon slowly recedes from Earth as tidal interactions trade rotation energy for distance. That same long process also means Earth's day used to be a bit shorter than it is now. Not dramatically enough to turn the night into some frantic cosmic sprint, thankfully, but enough that a Triassic day would have moved along a little faster than a modern one. Quiet changes, almost polite changes, spread over immense lengths of time. So if you stood in one of those late Triassic landscapes after sunset, letting the heat drain slowly out of the ground, you would be under a moon that looked a touch more present in the sky, a little more intimate perhaps, though not so different that your heart would fail to recognize it. Moonlight would still pool in river margins and silver the upper leaves of cycads and conifers. It would still turn stones pale and flatten shadows into soft, dark shapes. It would still do that ancient lunar trick of making the familiar feel distant, and the distant feel close enough to whisper to. Some things are older than eras. The stars, though, would be another matter. The constellations would not hold their modern shapes if you traveled back this far. Stars are not pinned to the sky like beads glued to black velvet. They move through the galaxy, each with its own path, and modern measurements from missions like Gaia show that stellar positions shift over time. Over a few thousand years, those changes are subtle. Over millions of years, the patterns begin to loosen. Over more than 200 million years, the familiar stick figures of Orion, Scorpius, or the Big Dipper would no longer look the way your modern eyes expect. The sky would still be full of stars, perhaps just as beautiful, but your usual map would fail you almost immediately, which is rude, honestly, though also rather lovely. And that failure would have a calming effect after the initial surprise. Without your modern constellations to label everything, the sky becomes less like a chart and more like a landscape again. You would notice brightness before names. The dense river of the Milky Way would still stretch across darkness, because you are still inside the same galaxy, still looking out through its crowded stellar neighborhoods. The moon would still rise and set. Planets would still wander against the star field, though not in arrangements you could predict by memory alone. The night would feel less like something you have studied and more like something you have entered. There is another quiet wonder hidden in this. Around the time the first dinosaurs appeared, the Sun and Earth were roughly 1 galactic year behind you compared with today. The Sun takes about 230 million years to make one orbit around the Milky Way, so in a broad sense, when you stand on Triassic ground, you are standing one solar system lap ago. It is a beautiful scale to hold gently in the mind. The same Earth, not yet broken into modern continents. The same moon, a little nearer. The same sun, carrying the whole planetary family around the galaxy, while below, small dinosaurs move through dust and moonlight with no idea they are living at the beginning of one of Earth's great stories. And if you stayed there long enough for full dark to settle in, the land beneath the sky would begin to change character. The heat of the day would ease only slowly in many places, because warm stone and dry ground do not surrender their warmth all at once. Night insects would take over the soundtrack in the greener places. Water, where it remained, would hold faint reflections of stars and moonlight. Along river edges, small animals would move with more confidence. Some predators would do the same. The first dinosaurs, depending on the species and the habitat, would either remain hidden in darkness or continue their cautious business under the old silver light. The sky above them would feel immense partly because the land below was so open. Pangea gave night a lot of room. You can almost picture one of those nights in full. A broad floodplain after the rainy season has faded, patches of water left in low ground, ferns thick where moisture lingers, dark trees at the margins, a thin brightness on stone. Somewhere nearby, an early dinosaur pauses, alert and slim, its body built more for motion than grandeur. Beyond it, farther off, another archosaur moves with heavier authority. The wind quiets. The sky continues, almost absurdly full of stars whose names have not been invented yet, and whose patterns will not survive into your own age. And in that ancient stillness, Earth feels less like a stage for future giants and more like a complete world already worthy of wonder. That may be the softest surprise of all. The age before dinosaur greatness was not waiting in darkness like an empty hallway before a performance. It had its own nights, its own beauty, its own finished moments. Moonlight on conifer branches was already lovely. A warm wind moving over red stone was already enough. The Milky Way above one joined continent was already magnificent. Dinosaurs had only just arrived, but the universe, as usual, was in no hurry to announce that. It simply kept turning the sky overhead, as if grandeur never needed applause. And while that sky turned, something else was beginning beneath the land, deep below the roots and riverbeds and drying mud. The great supercontinent was not going to stay whole forever. Under the calm of these ancient nights, the crust itself was slowly preparing to open. Beneath that calm sky, the ground was less settled than it looked. If you stood very still on a Triassic plain, nothing in the surface of things would tell you that the supercontinent under your feet was temporary. The conifers would not lean over and whisper geological updates. The river would keep doing river business. Small dinosaurs would continue stepping across damp sediment with admirable focus. The land would feel vast, solid, old beyond reason. And yet deep below that apparent stability, Earth was already working on its next arrangement. Pangea had come together through plate tectonics, the slow motion of Earth's outer shell over the softer, hotter mantle beneath. Continents had collided over immense spans of time, mountain ranges had risen, oceans had closed, and finally most of the land had gathered into that one great joined mass. But plate tectonics is not a polite system that finishes a project and then admires it forever. It keeps going. Heat from Earth's interior keeps moving material below the crust. Plates keep shifting, pressing, pulling, diving, and spreading. So even while the first dinosaurs were living on one enormous supercontinent, the deeper forces that would eventually tear that continent apart were already beginning to gather. You would not see continents visibly splitting in front of you, of course. This is deep time where even the dramatic things happen with the patience of stone. What begins first is strain. The crust stretches in places, it thins, faults form. Long cracks and rift valleys begin to define themselves. The surface may sink in some regions, making basins where sediment can collect. Lakes may form in those low places. Rivers may be redirected. The land does not shatter like glass. It loosens. It opens slowly, almost reluctantly, as if Earth has decided that one continent is lovely, but perhaps a little too much. This matters because the world of the first dinosaurs was not only shaped by climate and ecology, it was shaped by restlessness from below. The crust of Pangea was under tension in certain regions during the late Triassic, especially as the future Atlantic realm began its long early story. The full opening of the Atlantic lay ahead, but the first steps toward that future involved rifting, stretching, and the creation of elongated basins where sediments could pile up layer after layer. Those basins would later become extraordinarily useful to paleontologists, because when Earth opens slowly, it often keeps a good archive. You can picture one of those rift zones in a quiet moment. The land dips slightly through a broad valley bounded by faults. Seasonal streams feed a lake that expands and contracts with rainfall. Mud settles in still water. During dry intervals, the margins crack and harden. Later, new sediment covers the older surface, preserving the record of changing water levels, weather, and life. Nearby, the ground may feel normal enough to any passing reptile, which is a classic Earth move, hiding major tectonic behavior beneath a perfectly ordinary afternoon. Over long spans, these rifting regions become places of transition. They are shaped by stretching land, changing drainage, and sometimes volcanic activity. Magma can rise where the crust thins. Heat can alter local landscapes from below even before the great headline events arrive. By the time you reach the very end of the Triassic, tens of millions of years after the first dinosaurs appeared, that deep unrest will become far more dramatic in the form of massive volcanic outpourings associated with the Central Atlantic magmatic province. Enormous quantities of lava will spread across vast regions as Pangaea continues to break apart. But that belongs more fully to a later turning of the story. Here, near the beginning, what matters is the quiet prelude. The planet is preparing, and there is something almost moving in that. The first dinosaurs are walking over a world that is not finished deciding what shape it wants. The land they know as continuous will not remain continuous. The plains and forests and river systems that seem connected across impossible distances will one day be carried apart on different continents, separated by widening oceans. Places that sit side by side in the Triassic will later become Brazil and West Africa, Eastern North America and Northwestern Africa, India and Madagascar and Antarctica, and Australia taking their own long drifting paths. But none of that separation is visible to the early dinosaurs in any meaningful everyday sense. For them, the land is simply the land, and it goes on and on. Still, the geology below is quietly influencing their world. Rift basins help shape local habitats. Uplift and subsidence change water flow. Faulting can influence where lakes persist, where sediments gather, where floodplains spread. Volcanic gases and deeper earth processes are part of the background machinery that connects tectonics to climate over long timescales. Nothing on this planet happens in isolation. The crust affects the atmosphere. The atmosphere affects rainfall. Rainfall shapes vegetation. Vegetation shapes herbivores. Herbivores shape predators. And through all of it, time keeps smoothing the edges so that even profound changes feel, from within the moment, almost gentle. That is one reason the ancient world can feel so calm when you imagine it properly. It is not calm because nothing is happening. It is calm because everything is happening at geological speed. Continents are preparing to split. Basins are sinking. Sediments are collecting. Magma is gathering in the deep crust. Rivers are adjusting their paths by slow degrees. Life above continues, mostly unaware, eating, breeding, traveling, sheltering, surviving. The planet is enormously active, but it refuses to rush for your convenience. And perhaps that is the deepest beauty of this section of the journey. The Earth of the first dinosaurs was already carrying its future inside it. Not just the future of dinosaur greatness, but the future of oceans not yet opened, coastlines not yet drawn, mountain belts not yet worn down, and volcanic events not yet ignited. Every quiet floodplain held more than mud and tracks. It held the beginning of rearrangements so vast they would reshape the whole planet. So you stand once more on that old ground, warm even after sunset, with the memory of moonlight still resting on stone. Somewhere below, the crust is under strain. Somewhere far off, a basin is collecting another thin layer of sediment. Somewhere along a faulted region, the land is easing apart by an amount too small to notice and too important to stop. Above, the stars continue their slow, indifferent brilliance. Around you, early dinosaurs move through a world that feels whole, but is already learning how to open. And once you sense that hidden motion under the land, the final picture comes into focus. Dinosaurs did not arrive on a finished kingdom. They entered a changing planet, a world still recovering, still shifting, still preparing. And that is exactly what made it ready for them. And that is the quiet truth you finally arrive at. The first dinosaurs stepped into a world that was already ancient, already wounded, already beautiful, and still changing. They did not inherit a polished empire waiting under a spotlight. They entered a planet of long dry seasons and sudden rains, of fern-rich riverbanks and broad red plains, of conifer forests breathing resin into warm air, of strange armored herbivores, sharp-toothed hunters, watchful mammal relatives, and a sky that had been turning over restless land for ages beyond counting. They arrived on one giant continent under one immense roof of stars, while deep below, the crust was already preparing to pull that world apart. It is such a gentle irony. Dinosaurs are so often imagined as the rulers of a completed ancient Earth, and yet their story began in the middle of instability, not at the end of it. Maybe that is why their beginning feels so beautiful when you stay with it long enough. It is not beauty built from perfection. It is beauty built from resilience. Earth had survived its worst known mass extinction. Life had returned slowly, unevenly, without ceremony. Forests had spread again. Rivers had found their paths again. Food webs had rebuilt themselves from what remained. And into that recovering, warming, shifting world came these small, upright, capable animals, not yet famous, not yet giant, simply well-suited to a planet that rewarded endurance and flexibility. You can almost feel the tenderness of that moment. A small early dinosaur crossing damp sediment near a retreating river, moonlight on the edges of cycads, a warm breeze moving across stone after sunset. The distant presence of larger archosaur predators still more impressive to any sensible local observer. Nothing about the scene declares that history has changed. No voice from the sky announces a new age. The Earth does what it always does. It keeps turning. And in that quiet turning, one lineage begins to fit the world just a little better than before. That fit is everything. Dinosaurs would go on to thrive partly because the Earth kept changing. Later extinctions would remove many competitors. Continents would split. Climates would shift. Ecosystems would open and close and open again. And through much of the Mesozoic, dinosaurs would diversify into forms so varied that the early Triassic beginning would seem almost impossibly modest by comparison. Enormous sauropods would one day move with slow confidence across later landscapes. Predators of astonishing size and precision would emerge. Feathered forms would refine themselves into birds, carrying the dinosaur story into the ordinary mornings of your own world. All of that waits ahead. All of that is folded quietly into these first small steps. And perhaps that is the most comforting note in the whole journey. Great things do not always begin with grandeur. Sometimes they begin with a body learning how to move well across difficult ground. Sometimes they begin in harsh climates, in recovering worlds, in places where no one would yet guess what is coming. The Earth of the first dinosaurs was not easy, but it was full of possibility. It had room, it had pressure, it had challenge, it had time. Deep time, the old patient kind, where even the rise of giants begins as a whisper. If you look back across the whole night we have spent here, the image becomes very soft and very large all at once. One supercontinent breathing under a warm sky, seasons swinging between dryness and flood, plants older in style than the ones you know outside your window, animals experimenting in every direction, the moon a little nearer, the stars already shifting through galactic time. Beneath everything, the slow mechanics of a restless planet. And among all of it, the first dinosaurs, still small enough to overlook if you were not paying attention, already carrying the shape of the future in their bones. That future did not belong only to them, of course. Earth never gives itself entirely to one group forever. It lends time. It offers conditions. It changes its mind. Dinosaurs would flourish for a very long span, then face their own ending in a much later catastrophe. Mammals would rise into new opportunities. Primates would appear. Eventually, a species capable of naming stars and digging fossils and lying awake at night wondering about vanished worlds would arrive and ask what Earth was like when dinosaurs first appeared. Which is a wonderfully human thing to do, really. The planet goes through unimaginable transformations. And eventually, one clever little ape wants the full backstory in a calm voice before bed. And the backstory, it turns out, is not a tale of instant dominance. It is the story of a world still healing, still rearranging itself, still learning what could live where. Dinosaurs began as part of that unfinishedness. They belonged to a planet in motion. Their first age was not the age of certainty. It was the age of becoming. So if you keep one image from all of this, keep that one. Keep the warm, open world of the late Triassic. Keep the red ground, the river margin, the conifers standing dark at the edge of dusk. Keep the nearby calls of creatures that will not last and the small alert form of one that will. Keep the sense that Earth is never static, never fully done, never interested in handing out final versions. It is always making and unmaking, testing and reshaping, breaking and beginning again. And on that ancient Earth, when dinosaurs first appeared, all of those long planetary habits were already in place, quietly preparing the world they would briefly, magnificently share. The night can soften around that thought. You do not have to hold every name or date anymore. You can let the details spread out like stars over water and keep only the feeling of that old Earth resting in your mind. A broad, warm planet. A single continent, slow rivers under moonlight, ferns lifting after rain, far-off thunder fading over red stone, small dinosaurs moving carefully through a world that does not yet know their name. Everything becomes gentler here. The land cools by degrees, the sky deepens, the great weight of time stops feeling heavy and starts feeling soft, almost like a blanket laid over the world. Nothing needs to hurry, not the continents, not the rivers, not the stars, not you. The ancient Earth keeps its patient rhythm, and you can rest inside that rhythm for a little while. Picture the moon hanging over Triassic ground, pale and steady, touching the edges of conifer branches with silver light. Picture the dark outline of a quiet floodplain, still holding the day's warmth. Picture a small animal crossing the mud and leaving a line of delicate tracks that will vanish by morning, though the story itself will continue for millions of years. There is something peaceful in knowing that so much of life begins unnoticed. So the world grows still. The air settles. The distant prehistoric sounds fade into something softer, something almost like the hush of leaves in a light breeze. The vast supercontinent sleeps under the stars. The first dinosaurs keep their gentle place within it, and you can let the whole scene drift farther away, becoming dimmer, calmer, quieter, until it feels less like a story and more like a memory from a place you somehow visited. Stay with that old Earth for one last moment. Warm stone, soft dark, slow sky, a world beginning again. And then let it go.